The first thing you learn working at Brightwood Nursery is that the children never cry the same way twice. Marlo discovered this on her third day when little Thistle started making a sound like wind chimes during nap time. Not like a baby crying, like actual wind chimes. Each sob a different metallic note that made the other children giggle and clap their pudgy hands. Marlo had frozen in the middle of changing Bracken's diaper, listening to that beautiful, terrible music coming from the crib in the corner. "Don't stare," Nurse Evangeline had whispered, appearing beside her with that silent way she moved through the nursery. "Just hum the first lullaby. It helps them settle." Marlo had needed this job desperately. After her mother's medical bills had drained her savings and she'd been let go from her previous daycare position due to budget cuts, she'd been ready to take anything that paid decently. When she'd seen the Brightwood Nursery posting online, excellent salary, full benefits, and they were hiring immediately, it had seemed like a gift from heaven. The interview had been strange, though. Dr. Brightwood had asked unusual questions, like whether she'd ever experienced anything she couldn't explain, or if she believed there were things in the world beyond normal human understanding. At the time, she'd thought he was just checking to see if she was open-minded about different child development approaches. "Some of our children have very unique needs," he'd said, watching her face carefully. "We require caretakers who can adapt to unusual situations without becoming overwhelmed." She'd nodded enthusiastically, desperate to make a good impression. "I've always been good with challenging children. I don't give up easily." "Excellent," he'd said with that warm smile. "I think you'll fit in perfectly here." That was 6 months ago. Now Marlo knew all 4 lullabies by heart, though she still didn't understand why they worked so well. The songs were simple enough, nursery rhymes about sleepy time and gentle dreams, but something about the melodies made even the most restless children curl up and close their eyes. The 4 rules were woven right into the verses, so natural that most people wouldn't even notice them as rules at all, just sweet little songs about bedtime routines. "Close your eyes when the sun goes down, keep them shut till morning's found. Little ones who peek and pry, make the caretakers say goodbye. Gentle hands and gentle touch, never hold them way too much. Children need their space to grow, love them from a distance." So, when they call out strange, sweet names, turn away from all their games. Pretend you cannot hear them speak. Keep your answers soft and weak. Feeding time is set in stone. Never let them eat alone. What they ask for, do not bring. Give them only what we sing. Marlo had learned these lullabies during her first week, practicing the melodies until they felt as natural as breathing. Dr. Brightwood himself had taught them to her, his weathered hands moving gracefully as he demonstrated the proper rhythm. "Music is the universal language," he'd said, his pale eyes twinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Even our special children understand it perfectly." At first, Marlo had thought special meant developmentally delayed or physically disabled. She'd worked with special needs children before and felt confident in her abilities. But within her first few days, she realized that Brightwood's definition of special was unlike anything she'd encountered. There was the morning she'd arrived early and found baby Hazel sitting in her crib, having what looked like a conversation with someone Marlo couldn't see. The 10-month-old was babbling in response to silence, giggling at invisible jokes, reaching out to touch air as if someone was there. When Marlo approached, Hazel had looked up and waved, not at her, but at the empty space beside her. "Who are you talking to, sweetie?" Marlo had asked. Hazel had pointed at the corner of the room and said, clear as day, "Grandmama says you have pretty hair." Marlo had spun around to look at the corner, but there was nothing there. When she turned back, Hazel was sucking her thumb and staring at the ceiling like any normal baby. Then there was the incident with little Oakley, who was barely 6 months old, but had somehow managed to unlatch his crib and was found sitting on the floor, perfectly balanced, stacking blocks into a tower that reached nearly to his waist. The blocks were arranged in a pattern that hurt to look at directly. Not because it was ugly, but because it seemed to shift and move when Marlowe wasn't focusing on it. "How did you get out of your crib?" she'd asked him. Oakley had just smiled and knocked over his tower, sending blocks flying across the room. But when Marlowe went to pick them up, she noticed they were warm to the touch, as if they'd been sitting in sunlight for hours. The children at Brightwood Nursery were definitely special. Marlowe had figured that out within her first hour on the job. She'd expected crying, diaper changes, and the usual chaos of childcare. What she hadn't expected was little Sage speaking in complete sentences at 8 months old, or baby Rowan floating 3 inches above his mattress during afternoon naps. But the job paid incredibly well, more than any other nursery position she'd ever seen, and Dr. Brightwood had been so kind during her interview. He'd looked at her resume, smiled warmly, and said she was exactly what they needed. Someone with a nurturing heart, and more importantly, someone who could follow instructions precisely. "The children here require very specific care," he'd explained. "But I can tell you're the type of person who pays attention to details." He was right about that. Marlowe had always been good at following rules, even as a kid. It's what made her such a good caregiver. She never forgot feeding schedules, never missed medication times, and always remembered which children needed special attention. The special attention at Brightwood was just different. Like how Fern never cast a reflection in the changing table mirror, or how Jasper's baby teeth were perfectly sharp and white as pearls. How Cedar could make flowers bloom by touching them, leaving tiny handprints of growth on everything he grabbed. How little Willow sometimes spoke in languages that sounded old and musical. Languages Marlowe was sure no human baby should know. But the lullabies worked on all of them. No matter how unusual their behaviors, no matter what strange things they could do, the 4 songs always calmed them down. Made them sleepy and content, just like regular babies. Marlowe was humming the second lullaby while preparing bottles in the kitchen when she heard Evangeline scream. It wasn't a full scream, more like a sharp gasp that cut off suddenly. But in the 6 months Marlowe had worked here, she'd never heard Evangeline make a sound louder than a whisper. The woman glided through the nursery like she was made of silk, speaking so softly that children strained to hear her voice. Marlowe dropped the bottle she was holding and ran toward the main nursery room. The glass shattered behind her, formula splashing across the tile floor, but she didn't stop to clean it up. She found Evangeline standing perfectly still in front of Ash's crib, her back rigid and her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. "What happened?" Marlowe whispered, approaching slowly. Evangeline turned, and Marlowe saw something in her eyes she'd never seen before. Fear. Real, deep fear that made her face look older and more fragile. "He spoke," Evangeline said quietly. "He said my real name." Marlowe looked down at baby Ash, who was only 4 months old. He was lying on his back, staring up at them with eyes that seemed too bright, too aware. His tiny mouth curved into what might have been a smile. "Babies his age don't really talk yet," Marlowe said carefully. "Maybe you just thought you heard." "Evangeline Rose Morrison," Ash said clearly, his voice carrying perfectly across the quiet nursery. "Born October 13th, 1978, afraid of deep water and Christmas carols." The bottle fell from Evangeline's trembling hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. "The 3rd rule," she whispered. "When they call out strange, sweet names, turn away from all their games. Pretend you cannot hear them speak." She looked at Marlowe desperately. "I looked right at him. I answered when he said my name." Marlowe's mind raced through the lullaby lyrics. "Keep your answers soft and weak." But Evangeline hadn't kept her answers soft and weak. She'd responded with shock, with fear. She'd broken the rule completely. "It's okay," Marlowe said, trying to sound calmer than she felt. "We'll just We'll ask Dr. Brightwood what to do, he'll know how to fix this. But even as she said it, she noticed the other children in their cribs were all sitting up now, watching them with those two bright eyes. Little Sage was making soft cooing sounds that almost sounded like laughter. Rowan was floating again, hovering 6 inches above his mattress with his arms outstretched like he was conducting an orchestra. And Thistle had started making her wind chime sounds again, but this time, the melody was different. Darker. Like the notes were spelling out words in a language Marlowe couldn't understand, but somehow knew wasn't meant for human ears. "We need to leave," Evangeline said suddenly. "Right now." But before Marlowe could ask why, she heard Dr. Brightwood's footsteps coming down the hallway. His shoes made soft clicking sounds against the tile, the same comfortable rhythm she'd heard every day for 6 months. But today, something about those footsteps made her stomach twist with worry. "Ladies," Dr. Brightwood said as he entered the nursery, his voice as warm and gentle as always. "Is everything all right? I thought I heard some commotion." He looked exactly the same as he always did. Kind face, wire-rimmed glasses, soft gray hair combed neatly back. But Marlowe noticed that his pale eyes weren't looking at her or Evangeline. They were focused entirely on baby Ash, who was still lying in his crib with that strange, knowing smile. "Ash spoke," Evangeline said in a rush. "He said my full name, my birthday, things he couldn't possibly know. I think I broke the 3rd rule." Dr. Brightwood nodded slowly, as if this was exactly what he'd expected to hear. "I see. And did you respond to him when he spoke?" Yes, I was so surprised. Of course you were," Dr. Brightwood said kindly. "It's a perfectly natural reaction." He walked over to Ash's crib and looked down at the baby with what seemed like pride. "You did very well, little one. Very well indeed." Ash giggled, a sound like tinkling bells that made all the other children coo with delight. "Dr. Brightwood," Marlowe said carefully, "what happens when someone breaks the rules?" He turned to look at her then, and his smile was as warm as ever. But there was something different about his eyes now, something that made Marlowe think of deep water and places where light didn't reach. "Why, nothing terrible," he said gently. "The person simply learns why the rules exist in the first place." Evangeline had gone very still beside her. When Marlowe glanced over, she saw that the woman's face had drained of all color, leaving her skin pale as paper. "Evangeline," Dr. Brightwood continued in that same kind voice, "would you mind helping me with something in my office? There's a special project I've been working on, and I think you'd be perfect for it." I should stay and help with the children," Evangeline said weakly. "Oh, don't worry about that. Marlowe can handle things here for a while. Can't you, dear?" Marlowe wanted to say no, wanted to grab Evangeline's hand and run out of the nursery together. But Dr. Brightwood was looking at her with those pale, expectant eyes, and somehow her mouth opened and said, "Of course." "Wonderful," Dr. Brightwood said. "Come along then, Evangeline. This won't take long at all." As they walked toward the door, Evangeline turned back to look at Marlowe one last time. Her mouth moved silently, and Marlowe was sure she was trying to say something important. But before she could figure out what it was, Dr. Brightwood had guided her out of the room, leaving Marlowe alone with 12 children who weren't quite human. The nursery fell silent except for the soft sounds of baby breathing and the occasional coo or gurgle. Marlowe stood frozen in the middle of the room, trying to decide what to do next. That's when little Sage, who was barely 10 months old, sat up in her crib and said in a voice clear as crystal, "Marlowe Elizabeth Hart, born June 21st, 1996. Afraid of spiders and loud noises." All 12 children were sitting up now, watching her with bright, curious eyes. And Marlowe realized, with a cold certainty that settled in her bones, that she was about to learn what happened to caretakers who broke the 3rd rule. The nursery fell into an expectant hush. 12 pairs of two bright eyes watched her, waiting to see what she would do. Marlowe's mind raced through her options. She could run for the door, but Dr. Brightwood might still be in the hallway. She could try to call for help, but who would believe her? She could break down completely, but that wouldn't help anyone. Instead, she took a deep breath and did what she'd been trained to do. She followed the rules. "I can't hear you, sweeties," she said softly, turning away from Sage's crib. "It's nap time now." But as she moved toward the record player, little Bracken sat up in his crib and said, "Marlo Elizabeth Hart, you live at 247 Pine Street, apartment 3B. You drive a blue Honda Civic with a dent in the back bumper." Marlo kept walking, humming the first lullaby under her breath. "Close your eyes when the sun goes down. Keep them shut till morning's found. Your mother died of cancer last year," added Thistle in her sweet, musical voice. "You held her hand when she stopped breathing." Marlo's steps faltered for just a moment, but she kept moving toward the record player. How could they possibly know about her mother? "You're afraid you'll end up alone like she did," said baby Fern, who was only 7 months old. "You're afraid no one will ever love you enough to stay." "Stop," Marlo whispered, but she kept her voice soft and weak, just like the rule said. "You took this job because you needed the money," continued Rowan, floating gently above his mattress. "But you stayed because we make you feel needed." "You love us," said Cedar, touching the rail of his crib. Tiny flowers bloomed where his fingers touched the wood. "You love us even though you know we're not like other children." Marlo reached the record player with shaking hands. She put on the classical music and tried to steady her breathing. Behind her, the children kept talking, their voices layering over each other like a choir. "We love you too, Marlo. We don't want you to leave like the others. We want you to stay and take care of us forever. We can make you happy here. We can make you forget about being lonely. We can make you forget about everything outside these walls." Marlo turned around slowly, still humming the lullaby. The children were all sitting up in their cribs, reaching toward her with tiny hands. Their faces were so sweet, so innocent looking. If she hadn't known better, she would have thought they were just regular babies who wanted comfort. But she did know better. She'd learned enough about Brightwood Nursery to understand that nothing here was what it seemed. "Lie down now," she said gently, walking from crib to crib. "It's time to sleep." One by one, she helped them settle back onto their mattresses. Their skin felt warm and soft, just like any normal baby's. They smelled like powder and lotion, and that sweet, clean scent all infants have. When she tucked Willow in, the little girl grabbed her finger and held on tight, just like babies do. For a moment, Marlo felt that familiar surge of affection she always experienced when caring for children. These babies needed her. They depended on her for food, comfort, and safety. It didn't matter what they were capable of. They were still small and vulnerable and deserving of love. But then she remembered Evangeline's terrified face. She remembered the way Dr. Brightwood had looked at baby Ash with that strange pride. She remembered the third rule and what happened to caretakers who broke it. As she tucked in the last child, little Sage reached up and touched her cheek with one tiny finger. "Don't be scared," Sage whispered. "We'll take good care of you." The words were meant to be comforting, but they made Marlo's blood run cold. Because the way Sage said it made it sound like Marlo was the one who needed taking care of, not the other way around. Marlo stood perfectly still, remembering the third rule. When they call out strange, sweet names, turn away from all their games. Pretend you cannot hear them speak. Keep your answers soft and weak. But it was hard to pretend she hadn't heard Sage say her full name and birthday when all 12 children were staring at her with expectant faces. "I can't hear you," Marlo whispered, turning away from Sage's crib. "Time for your nap now." She walked to the record player in the corner and put on the soft classical music that usually played during rest time. Her hand shook as she lowered the needle, but she managed to keep her voice steady as she began humming the first lullaby. Close your eyes when the sun goes down. Keep them shut till morning's found. One by one, the children laid back down in their cribs, but Marlowe could feel them watching her, even with their eyes closed. She continued humming as she cleaned up the broken bottle and spilled formula, trying to act like everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. The nursery seemed too quiet, too still. Even the classical music sounded strange, like it was playing at the wrong speed. 20 minutes passed before Dr. Brightwood returned. He appeared in the doorway alone, smoothing down his gray hair with one hand. "Where's Evangeline?" Marlowe asked immediately. "She's helping with that special project I mentioned," Dr. Brightwood said with his usual gentle smile. "She'll be quite busy with it for some time." "What kind of project?" "Oh, just some research. Nothing you need to worry about." He walked over to check on the children, moving from crib to crib with practiced ease. "You did well handling things on your own. I'm impressed." Marlowe watched him carefully. Everything about him seemed exactly the same as always. The kind voice, the gentle movements, the warm smile. But she kept thinking about the way he'd looked at baby Ash, like he was proud of something terrible. "Dr. Brightwood," she said slowly, "what exactly are these children?" He paused at Rowan's crib, his hand resting on the wooden rail. "They're children who need special care. That's all you need to know. But they can do things that regular babies can't do. They know things they shouldn't know. Many children are gifted in unusual ways," Dr. Brightwood said, not looking at her. "Our job is to provide them with a safe, nurturing environment." "That's not what I mean, and you know it." Marlowe's voice was getting stronger, braver. "These children aren't human, are they?" Dr. Brightwood finally turned to face her. His pale eyes studied her face for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he was looking right through her. "What do you think they are?" he asked quietly. Marlowe thought about everything she'd seen over the past 6 months. The floating, the strange languages, the way flowers bloomed at Cedar's touch. The two sharp teeth, and the sounds like wind chimes, and the complete lack of reflections. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I know they're not what they appear to be." Dr. Brightwood nodded slowly. "No, they're not. But that doesn't make them any less deserving of love and care, does it?" "I suppose not. But why the rules? Why the lullabies?" "Because," Dr. Brightwood said, moving closer to her, "some children need very specific boundaries to feel safe. The lullabies help them remember who they are and where they belong. The rules help their caretakers stay protected." Protected from what? From becoming too attached, from asking too many questions, from learning things that might be difficult to forget. Marlowe felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to keep talking. "What happened to the caretakers who worked here before me?" "They moved on to other positions, just like Evangeline is doing now." "I want to see her." "I'm afraid that's not possible." "Why not?" Dr. Brightwood's smile never wavered, but his eyes grew colder. "Because some transitions require complete focus. Evangeline is learning new skills that demand her full attention." "What kind of skills?" "The kind that help her take better care of our special children." Marlowe stared at him, trying to read the truth in his face. But his expression remained perfectly calm, perfectly kind. It was like talking to a mask. "I want to leave," she said suddenly. "I quit." "I'm sorry to hear that," Dr. Brightwood said gently, "but I'm afraid you can't leave just yet." "What do you mean I can't leave?" "This is a job, not a prison." "Of course it's not a prison, but you've learned quite a lot about our children during your time here. We need to make sure you understand how important it is to keep their secrets." Marlowe backed toward the door, but Dr. Brightwood didn't try to stop her. He just stood there smiling that kind, patient smile. The children have grown quite fond of you," he continued, "especially little Sage. She's been working very hard on her pronunciation." As if summoned by her name, Sage sat up in her crib and looked directly at Marlowe. "Don't go," she said in her clear, impossible voice. "We like you here." The other children began sitting up too, one by one. Thistle started making her wind chime sounds again. Rowan began to float. Cedar reached out and touched the wooden rail of his crib, and tiny green shoots began sprouting from the grain. "You see?" Dr. Brightwood said warmly. "They've become quite attached to you. It would be cruel to leave them now." "Let me go," Marlowe said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I won't tell anyone about this place, I promise." "Oh, I know you won't tell anyone, but not because you're leaving." Dr. Brightwood walked over to a cabinet and pulled out a familiar-looking bottle. "Because you're going to stay and help us with something very special." The bottle was filled with clear liquid that seemed to shimmer when he held it up to the light. Marlowe had seen bottles like this before, the ones they used for the children's special feeding times. The liquid that was never quite milk and never quite formula, but something else entirely. "What is that?" "It's how we help people transition into their new roles here at Brightwood," Dr. Brightwood said gently. Evangeline found it quite helpful. "Where is she?" Marlowe demanded. "I want to see Evangeline right now." "Very well," Dr. Brightwood said with a sigh. "I suppose you have a right to know what your future holds." He walked to a door at the back of the nursery, a door Marlowe had never noticed before. It was painted the same color as the walls, almost perfectly camouflaged. He opened it and gestured for her to follow. Beyond the door was a narrow hallway lined with windows. Through the glass, Marlowe could see into small, comfortable-looking rooms. Each room contained a single person sitting peacefully in a rocking chair. The first room held a young man with dark hair, rocking gently back and forth while humming a familiar melody. He looked to be in his 20s, wearing clean clothes and a serene expression. On his lap sat a toddler that looked almost human except for its eyes, which reflected light like a cat's. The young man was feeding the child from a bottle filled with that shimmer liquid, and both of them seemed perfectly content. The second room contained an older woman knitting what looked like baby blankets. Her fingers moved in perfect rhythm, never dropping a stitch, never pausing to check her work. The blankets piled around her were beautiful, intricate patterns and soft colors that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Sitting at her feet was a child who looked about 4 years old, playing with blocks that moved and rearranged themselves. The third room held someone Marlowe recognized. "Evangeline," she whispered. Evangeline sat in her rocking chair with a serene expression on her face, her eyes staring at nothing. She was humming one of the lullabies, the same 4 verses over and over again. On her lap sat a baby that looked almost human but not quite, its eyes too bright, its smile too knowing. The baby was reaching up to touch Evangeline's face, and she was letting it, smiling peacefully as those tiny fingers traced her cheeks. "She looks so happy," Dr. Brightwood said softly. "Much happier than she was when she worked in the main nursery. The stress was really getting to her, you know. All that worry about following the rules perfectly, all that fear of making mistakes. Now she doesn't have to worry about anything at all." Marlowe pressed her face against the glass, trying to get Evangeline's attention, but the woman didn't seem to see her. She just kept rocking and humming, lost in her own peaceful world. "What did you do to her?" Marlowe asked. "We helped her," Dr. Brightwood said simply. "The transition liquid helps people let go of their anxieties and fears. It allows them to focus entirely on caring for the children. No more worrying about bills or relationships or career goals. Just pure, simple purpose. You drugged her. We gave her peace. Look at her face. Have you ever seen her so calm?" Marlowe had to admit that Evangeline did look peaceful. In the 6 months they'd worked together, Evangeline had always seemed slightly nervous, always checking and double-checking her work, always worrying about whether she was doing everything correctly. The woman in the rocking chair looked like a completely different person, relaxed, content, free from stress. But she also looked empty, like something essential had been taken away, leaving behind a beautiful shell. "How many rooms are there?" Marlowe asked. 12 in this section, Dr. Brightwood said. "But we have other areas for different age groups. The children grow up, you see. They need different kinds of care as they develop, and we need caretakers who can grow with them." "Show me." Dr. Brightwood hesitated. "I don't think that's wise. You're not ready for the advanced stages yet." "Show me," Marlowe repeated more firmly. With a sigh, Dr. Brightwood led her further down the hallway. The next section of windows revealed larger rooms with older children, some who looked to be in elementary school age, others who appeared to be teenagers. But they all had that same quality of being almost but not quite human. Their proportions were slightly off, their movements too fluid, their eyes too bright. And caring for them were more former employees, all with that same peaceful, empty expression. They helped the children with activities that made no sense, teaching them to stack blocks into patterns that hurt to look at, reading from books written in languages that seemed to shift and change on the page, playing games that followed rules Marlowe couldn't understand. "This is what happens to everyone who works here long enough," Dr. Brightwood explained. "Eventually, they become so attached to the children that they can't bear to leave, so we help them stay permanently." "How long have you been doing this?" "Oh, many years. Decades, actually. The children have very specific needs, and it takes a special kind of person to meet those needs properly. We've found that traditional childcare approaches simply don't work." "What are they?" Marlowe asked again. "What are these children really?" Dr. Brightwood was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "They're children who need love and care, just like any others. Does it really matter what else they might be?" But Marlowe was beginning to understand. The nature-themed names, the abilities that defied explanation, the way they seemed to know things they shouldn't know. The rules that kept caretakers at a safe distance, prevented them from getting too attached or learning too much. "They're not human," she said quietly. "They're something else. Something that looks like human children but isn't." "And if they are," Dr. Brightwood asked, "does that make them less deserving of care? Less worthy of love?" Marlowe thought about little Sage's sweet smile, about the way Thistle's wind chime laughter could brighten even the gloomiest day, about how Cedar's flowers brought beauty to the sterile nursery environment, and how Rowan's floating had always made her smile despite how impossible it should have been. "No," she said honestly, "but it makes them dangerous to the people who care for them." "Only if those people can't maintain proper boundaries," Dr. Brightwood said. "The rules exist for a reason, Marlowe. They protect both the children and the caretakers. Break the rules, and the protection disappears." "She's helping care for the older children," Dr. Brightwood explained. "The ones who've outgrown the nursery but still need special attention. She's very happy in her new role. She looks drugged. She looks peaceful. The transition can be difficult at first, but everyone adjusts eventually. The liquid helps smooth the process." Marlowe stared through the window at Evangeline's blank, contented face. "How many caretakers have you done this to?" "All of them, eventually. It's the natural progression of working here. First you learn the rules, then you learn why the rules exist, and finally you learn how to become part of our family permanently. I won't drink that stuff." "You will," Dr. Brightwood said with absolute certainty, "because the alternative is much less pleasant." Behind them, the children in the nursery had begun making sounds. Not crying, but something else. A harmony of voices that seemed to pull at something deep in Marlowe's chest. The melody was hauntingly beautiful and completely terrifying at the same time. "They're calling to you," Dr. Brightwood said. "They want you to stay and take care of them forever. Doesn't that sound wonderful?" Never having to worry about finding another job, never having to leave the children you've grown to love. Just peace and purpose and the satisfaction of nurturing something precious. The singing grew louder, more insistent. Marlo felt her feet wanting to turn around, to walk back into the nursery and pick up one of those beautiful, terrible children. But instead, she ran. She sprinted down the hallway past the windows full of drugged caretakers, past Dr. Brightwood's surprised shout, past everything that had trapped her in this place for 6 months. The front door was locked, but she grabbed a chair from the waiting area and smashed the glass. The alarm system screamed as she climbed through the broken window, cutting her hands on the jagged edges. Blood dripped from her palms onto the concrete steps, but she didn't stop running until she reached her car in the parking lot. Her hands shook so badly, she could barely get the key in the ignition. Behind her, she could see Dr. Brightwood standing in the broken doorway, still holding that shimmer-filled bottle. He wasn't chasing her. He was just watching with that same patient, kind expression, like he knew something she didn't. As she drove away, Marlo caught a glimpse of the children in the nursery windows. They were all standing up in their cribs, pressed against the glass, watching her leave. Their faces were sad but not surprised, like they'd seen this happen before. Marlo drove straight to the police station, but when she tried to explain what had happened, the words sounded crazy even to her own ears. A nursery for non-human children. Caretakers being drugged and kept in rooms like pets. Rules hidden in lullabies. The desk sergeant looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Ma'am, are you feeling all right?" Officer Rodriguez asked gently. "Have you been drinking or taking any medication today?" "No, I'm completely sober," Marlo insisted. "Please, you have to believe me. There are people being held against their will at that nursery. My coworker Evangeline, she's in danger." "What's the address of this nursery?" 412 Maple Street, Brightwood Nursery. Please just send someone to check on them." Officer Rodriguez made some notes but looked skeptical. "And you said the children at this nursery aren't human?" "I know how it sounds, but you have to see it for yourself. They can do things that regular babies can't do. They know things they shouldn't know." "Ma'am, I think you might be having some kind of stress reaction. Working with children can be very demanding. Look at my hands." Marlo held up her palms, showing the cuts from the broken glass. "I had to break a window to escape. Why would I do that if I wasn't telling the truth?" The cuts were real enough that Officer Rodriguez agreed to investigate. He drove to 412 Maple Street with Marlo following in her own car, expecting to find the nursery exactly as she'd left it. Broken front window, alarm still blaring, Dr. Brightwood probably trying to clean up the mess. But when they arrived, the building looked completely different. The windows were intact, there was no broken glass on the steps, and the alarm wasn't sounding. The sign that had read, "Brightwood Nursery, Specialized Childcare," was gone, replaced by a simple, "For Rent" sign in the front yard. "This is it," Marlo said, pointing at the building. "This is where I worked for 6 months." Officer Rodriguez checked the front door. It was locked, but there was no sign of damage. He peered through the windows and saw empty rooms with bare walls and dusty floors. "Ma'am, this building appears to be vacant. Are you sure this is the right address?" "Of course I'm sure." Marlo tried the door herself, then ran around to the back of the building. Everything was different. The playground where she'd sometimes taken the children for fresh air was gone. The garden where Cedar had made flowers bloom was just empty dirt. Even the parking lot looked wrong. Older, more cracked, like it hadn't been maintained in years. Officer Rodriguez called for backup, and soon 2 more patrol cars arrived. They managed to contact the building's owner, who came with keys and let them inside. The interior was completely empty. No nursery equipment, no cribs, no record player. Just vacant rooms with peeling paint and dusty floors. The owner, a tired-looking man named Mr. Patterson, said the building had been empty for over 3 years. "I've been trying to rent it out, but there's not much demand for commercial space in this area," he explained. "No one's been in here except me and the occasional potential renter." "But I worked here," Marlo insisted. 6 months, every day. There was a nursery here, with 12 children and 2 other employees. Mr. Patterson shook his head. "I'm sorry, but that's not possible. This building hasn't been occupied since the previous tenant moved out in 2022. The police spent another hour searching the building, taking photos of Marlo's injuries and collecting her statement. But without any evidence to support her claims, there wasn't much they could do. "We'll file a report," Officer Rodriguez told her as they prepared to leave. "But I really think you should consider talking to someone about what happened today. Sometimes stress can cause people to experience things that feel very real." "I'm not crazy," Marlo said quietly. "Something happened to me in that building. Something happened to Evangeline and all the other caretakers who worked there. If you can provide us with any concrete evidence, employment records, pay stubs, contact information for your coworkers, we'd be happy to investigate further." But when Marlo got home and looked through her papers, she couldn't find any proof that she'd ever worked at Brightwood Nursery. No employment contract, no pay stubs, no tax documents. It was like the job had never existed. Her bank account, however, told a different story. For the past 6 months, she'd been receiving regular deposits of exactly the amount Dr. Brightwood had promised to pay her. The money was real, even if she couldn't prove where it had come from. Over the next few days, Marlo tried everything she could think of to prove her story. She searched online for any mention of Brightwood Nursery, but found nothing. She called every childcare licensing agency in the state, but none of them had any record of a facility by that name. She even hired a private investigator, but he couldn't find any trace of Dr. Brightwood or the other employees she'd described. It was like the entire place had been erased from existence. But in the basement, the police found something that made them take Marlo's story more seriously. 12 small rooms with rocking chairs and windows that looked into a central area. The rooms still smelled faintly of something sweet and chemical, like medicine disguised as candy. The case was never solved. There was no trace of Dr. Brightwood, no records of anyone by that name owning or renting the property. No missing persons reports that matched the descriptions of Evangeline and the other caretakers Marlo had seen through those windows. But Marlo knew she'd escaped something terrible. She moved to a different state, changed her name, and found work at a regular daycare center where the children cried normal tears and learned to walk at normal ages. Sometimes, late at night, she still heard those 4 lullabies in her head, the rules woven into innocent-sounding verses designed to keep caretakers safe from children who were much more than they appeared to be. She never hummed those songs aloud. She never taught them to the normal children in her care, and she never, ever worked another job without thoroughly researching the company first. Because somewhere out there, she knew Dr. Brightwood was still running his special nursery, still caring for children who weren't quite human, still looking for caretakers who were good at following rules and paying attention to details, still singing those lullabies that sounded so sweet and harmless, right up until you learned what they really meant.